almost to the end of 2016. It will be good to see the back end of that year. Yeah, and what a year has this been. And so if you're anything like me, you're flailing and sputtering like a drowning man, just trying to stay above water and asking the same question. You know, all this time, 10 years, I've been asking myself, as you have, what am I supposed to do? And now this year, it's like, what the heck am I supposed to do now? Same question, just magnified by many, many things. And so this is the question that I had been asking myself for many years ago. What's the best use of a person's time? And I can go to a parade, a 350.org parade, and I can carry around a poster that says, you know, for the sake of the innocent children of all beings, I stand against the corporate plunder of the planet. And that's all right. But even for a philosopher, that's pretty abstract. And I can quote Bill McKibben, I'll get this right. He said, the Trump presidency will require fierce resistance. That's right, but it's still a little bit abstract. What does that exactly mean for all of us? And I have lately been focusing on a particular place in time, wrote an article about Standing Rock. I said, here on that stretch of highway through the trampled grasses of the prairie, the global context between two worldviews is playing out. The questions that hang in the air mixed with tear gas and sage. Is land only a chunk of property that we can use or abuse at will? Or is land a place of material and spiritual sustenance that we honor and respect? Fine. That's fine, but what in particular, what is it really like to stand against the corporate plunder of the planet? And what is it really like to mount a fierce resistance? And how do the contests between worldviews, how do they play out on the ground? In particular, can we even imagine this in particular? If we can't imagine it, then how is it ever going to happen? So this was the reason why I decided I was going to try to tell a story. I wanted to tell a story of triumph and resistance. I wanted to look deep into a real place with, well, real imaginary people and find out what they were thinking and what they were doing when they were faced with a crisis of plundering. And what I found out when I started digging deep into the lives of these imagined people was how much fun they were having, and how much they were laughing, and how much music there was in their lives, banjos and pianos and even an accordion. And everybody, even the good guys and the bad guys, they were all trying to do the right thing. All of them, all they wanted was to love and to be loved. All of the people, the good guys and the bad guys, got out of bed in the morning, put on their Carhartts, and went out and made terrible mistakes. That's what this book is about. It took me 10 years to write this. And I knew how I wanted it to end. So let's start there. Are you ready, Pete? The guy up here holding his ears. Signaling to the fireworks crew, the banjo player laid down a mighty lick. The postmaster touched a flame to a wick, and an aerial shell burst into pink bloom against dark clouds. Its petals disintegrated into burning stars. In the glare, a paw of water reached over the ridge above the dam site. The flood crouched there, gathering its strength. Logs spun in the advancing edge. Then the flood clawed through the last rocks and bounded down the mountainside. With great leaps from ledge to ledge, it batted away the root balls of ferns and tore out young alders. In a final black sluice, the flood smashed onto the clam flat. It crouched again and bounded toward the dam. Aren't we going to have fun? So here's the thing. So what good is it? You figure out, oh, this is the way this story is going to end, with this triumphant transformational act of resistance. But how is it going to start? And how are we going to get from the beginning to the end? So the next thing that I needed, obviously, was a place. And luckily, Frank and I had just got this little cabin, as Jack said, on the edge of a tidal flat, up there on Chichagof Island. You've seen the pictures of it. And it's a place that is so full of stories, fish stories and bear stories and all these stories. I thought this was a really a wonderful place to write about. So may I introduce you to Good River Harbor. From the distance, Good River Harbor looked like a string of gulls flying along the water below the mountain range, or a rim of barnacles just uncovered by the tide. One thing it did not look like was a town, but the town fathers could be forgiven for that. The wilderness was desperately steep. The only place to put a building was on a tidal flat that flooded twice a day. So the worthy fathers built the town on a rickety thicket of stilts and piers. The town couldn't be distinguished from the docks, or the docks from the town. Almost everything was either tied to a dock or built on it. Almost everything grew a thick beard of barnacles and blue mussels. There were no cars, but there were plenty of wheelbarrows and bikes, and a row of beached boats, some more deeply filled with greening rainwater than others, and fine skiffs, and seiners nosing into the dock like suckling puppies. The town grew and shrank like the tides as it sold and then exhausted the abundance of the land. In order of date expunged. Ancient yellow cedars draped in old man's beards. Sitka spruce trees 6 feet across. Sweet feathery hemlocks 300 years old. King salmon a yard long and fat as dogs. Herring dripping yellow eggs. Cross-eyed halibut as big as a fisherman's skiffs. The sawmill closed after loggers high-graded the forest and clear-cut all the slopes accessible to barges. The cannery closed when the fish went away. Only 47 people lived in Good River Harbor when the ferry pulled in. Next, I needed some people. I didn't have models for my people. I really, really didn't want to do that. So I made them up out of whole cloth, borrowing now and then a story that one of my friends up there would have told me. So the first person I'd like to introduce you to is Lillian Mary Shaddy. I confess that when I started to describe Lillian Mary Shaddy, I was describing my grandmother. But then I looked in the mirror one day and I thought, my God, I am my grandmother. So never mind about that. As the ferry pushed into the pilings, Lillian Mary Shaddy spread a plastic grocery bag on the bench at the top of the gangway and lowered herself to sitting. She tugged her raincoat closed and searched behind her for the belt. No yellow rain slicker for her. Lillian wore a regular department store raincoat, the kind women wear in Seattle. Carefully, she tied the belt in a square knot that perched like a chipmunk in the cozy place between her bosom and her belly. She adjusted the clear plastic rain bonnet over her hair, which was that day a color called mahogany, and settled her back against the bench. On that damp morning, Lillian felt as groany jointed as the old ferry, but it's not attractive to complain, and she didn't. She lit a cigarette instead. Smoking in the rain is one of the arts a lady acquires in Southeast Alaska, learning to hold the cigarette between her thumb and forefinger, while the rest of her fingers make a nice little tent. So Lillian owns the bath and the bar in town. The bar is in the front and the bath is in the back, and the laundry. And she holds many surprises. I won't tell you, spoil it by telling you about those surprises, except that she sings like an angel. But she has lived this long, bittersweet, complicated life, and she has learned many things. This was Lillian's time for thinking, when the last paying customer had swayed out the door and pissed into the sea. She sank into a chair and levered her feet onto the windowsill. Her ankles were swollen, and her feet bulged around the shape of her shoes, the way a ball of dough only gradually releases the shape of the baker's fist. There's nothing a man does that lasts, Lillian knew. A man makes his plans, plots it all out, builds his buildings, thinks he's changed the world. But a few years go by, and everything on his blueprints is decaying in a skunk cabbage swale. Alders grow over it, erasing every trace. When you have a choice between betting on a man and betting on an alder Lillian knew, always put your money on the tree. So now there's Tick. And Tick is this really dear, sweet man. I mean, he's just this simple guy, and I felt really bad giving him all the hard moral choices. But as a matter of fact, they all land right on his big square shoulders. You know, he's just this guy. He's a halibut slimer. That's the person who scrapes the guts out of a halibut. And a lumberman and a carpenter and whatever else needs doing in this town, that's who he is. He's just a dad trying to raise his boys. And in fact, he's one of Lillian's improvement projects. Lillian had told him a dozen times that he should clean up a little bit for his own good. Trim that awful orange beard. The thing looked like a stray cat sleeping on his chest. Get rid of those rubber overalls that come barely to the top of his boots. But he protested. He said he cut his overalls off because they're too short anyway, him so tall. And this way they're not always underwater. And he liked his beard. Kept his chest warm and scared mice away. And that baseball cap, she told him, it looks like it spent the night in the bilge. Well, that's because it spent lots of nights in the bilge, he said back. So he's the one who's called on to move a piano from the ferry onto the bow of his boat, onto the trail that goes up to the Green Cove cabin. Now, in order to move a piano to a trail from a boat, you need a really good high tide, right? You don't want to be dragging that piano across those slippery rocks in the old kelp, right? You want a tide that's so big that it's going to lift the bow of your boat right up under the lip of that trail. So I call those big tides, the really big tides, the 17-footers, I call those piano tides, because that's what you need to move a piano. And Tick did manage to move that piano into the cabin. He couldn't, he got it up on the front porch and discovered at that point that it wouldn't go through the door. But that's another story here. And the thing is, you can make fun of Alaskans. Well, some writers might. But you have to acknowledge that they're very, very good at what they do. And Tick got that cabin moved with no crushed fingers and not all that many beers. Ooh, now I have to introduce you to Axel Hagerman. Axel was a polyp of a man. Small, soft, white, roundish now, but capable of many shapes. He covers his body with snappy nautical blues. Under his jacket, his shirt collar was white. White of all things in Good River Harbor. When Axel was a boy, he lived with old Mr. and Mrs. Hagerman on their fishing boat. It was a steel seiner, but it wasn't fishing because Mr. Hagerman bunged up his back. The boat was their house, tied to the dock with rope thicker than a boy's arm and never once untied. Kids would have made fun of Axel living in a steel box with a straggle-haired woman and a humpback man like in some evil fairy tale, but they were afraid of him. Mrs. Hagerman died before Axel got out of high school, and Mr. Hagerman got sent to the Pioneer Home in Sitka. So Axel lived in that cold steel seiner by himself through all the year he was 16, but here's the thing. In that year, he fixed up that old boat, got the diesels running, took apart the winches and pullers, oiled them, and put them back together again, mended the nets. And the very month he graduated from high school, he hired a crew of grown men, drove an axe blade through the crusted ropes, and went seining for pink salmon. All along, that kid had had a plan. He came back with money in his pocket, and the crew members had money in their pockets, and he started dating the cutest girl in the high school. Then, all the boys wanted to work for Axel, including Tick. They cleaned his fish. They cut his logs. They scraped his barnacles off his boats, whatever he had going. And then there is Kenny. Dear Kenny, I tried really hard not to kill him. I even tried to drown the teenagers instead, but they wouldn't be drowned. They kept saving themselves, so I said, okay, you get to live, but somebody has to go. And that turned out to be Kenny. And it was a terrible loss because he's the philosopher in the town. And we all know that no town can get along without a philosopher, right? Okay, and oh, the secrets that he hides even from himself. Townspeople tolerated him, even though they might have been a little put off by his manner and his fur hats. But little boys worshipped him. He taught the kids to set miniature snares to catch mice and mink, and when they did, he made the skins into hats and wore them every day. The little boys loved Kenny the way little boys love belches, and they followed him at a distance like black flies follow the smell of sweat. And tourists loved Kenny, even though they pretended not to see him. He was a tourist attraction, all right, sitting there scowling in a wheelchair. Rain or shine, he wore a camouflage poncho and those ridiculous fur hats. And if that wasn't a sight, a guy in a house mouse hat with tails hanging down beside each ear. He braided his chin hair into tight little braids bound with rubber bands. Lillian had told him 100 times, just shave. Is that so hard? Har, he always said, as if he were some kind of pirate. And that's the backstory the little boys gave him, that he was a fierce pirate, maybe even Jack Sparrow, who marauded over the 7 seas until he got his legs cracked by cannon fire from a British frigate, and he had to come to Good River Harbor wearing a disguise that fooled no one. Little boys know things like that. So now there's lots of other characters, and they all have their own points of view. The teenagers, I got some teenagers who come as close to sex as anybody in the book. I figured as long as they were going to live, they might as well have some fun. So let's put the characters in this place, and let's see what happens. I have picked out 2 scenes for you. Now, I didn't know how to write a novel, right? Who knows how to write a novel? Raise your hand. Some of you do. So I went to the library and I got out a book, How to Write a Novel. And it said, well, you don't actually write a novel, you write scenes. I can write scenes. Okay, so here's the scene where Nora tries to get Kenny to help her stop Axel's plan to put a bear in a pit and charge admission. Kenny, how am I going to trap a bear? Tommy hovered a safe distance in front of Kenny, who was sitting in his wheelchair in the morning sun by the library door, cleaning his fingernails with a pocket knife. He was wearing a new hat he'd made of dried fish skin. Don't bother me, micro man. I got digging and grubbing to do. Like I said, look it up on the internet. They got 2 computers hooked up right here in the library. Learn to use them. Go to artofmanliness.com. Everything you need to know to be a man. I did not make that up. Now go away. Tommy took a single step backwards. Do you think a man trap? I could dig this humongous hole and cover it with sticks and leaves, and the bear would walk by, sniff, sniff, and whoop, down in the hole it goes. And then whoop, up out of the hole the bear comes in one giant leap and bites off your butt. A big grin spread over Kenny's face, lifting the braids in his beard. He growled suddenly and swiped a hand at Tommy, who leapt backward and teetered at the edge of the boardwalk. Kid, I hope you survive long enough to grow a brain. How about you go get me a squirrel instead, he said. 25 cents for the hide, and I'll teach you to skin it. Get it how? Like I taught you. Sit real still in a tree, and when it comes by, clobber it with a 2x4. Really? Tommy's eyes were big. Cripes, Kenny said. How old are you? 6. Tommy held up one hand and a thumb. Plenty old. Kenny reached under his poncho and pulled out a slingshot. By the time the librarian arrived, Kenny had Tommy shooting pebbles at the O on the Ocean Dreamer's transom. Couldn't hit the O, but he scored a lot of hits on the sailboat's hull. 10 o'clock on the button. And here came Nora and Chum. They all crowded into the library together. That day, Kenny was studying an internet site that showed how to skin a squirrel by turning it inside out over a post. You sort of prop up the body on the post, cut it just right, give a steady pull down on the hide, and get it skinned in one motion. Kenny wondered how mountain men ever figured things out before the internet. But Nora wasn't looking at the video that Kenny was studying or listening to him mutter. She was looking at him. "What are you studying today?" she asked, but not like she cared. "The life cycle of squirrels," said Kenny. But then he looked away because he didn't want to encourage her. Kenny thought, here it comes, and sure enough, Nora reached across the table and put her hands on top of his hands, sort of grabbed the back of Kenny's fingerless gloves. He wished she wouldn't do that. "We've got to do something," she said. "We," Kenny said. It was the only coherent word he could come up with. What the hell was she thinking? They hadn't done anything that needed anything done about it. "Axel has hired Tick to build a bear pit," she said, "selling refreshments and charging admission to see bears caged in the cistern out at the beach. It's the latest Good River Products Rural Economic Development Plan." On the video, a man's hands in rubber gloves placed the little naked squirrel on the table next to its inside-out skin. Kenny looked hard at Nora. "What is it about you, Nora? What did this town do to deserve you anyway? Nora Montgomery, Mary Poppins' evil twin, floating into town in her yellow raincoat whenever we need somebody to fuck things up." Nora's eyes flashed into fire like propane rings, but soon it was water, not fire, that shimmered there. She closed her eyes and dropped her forehead onto the table. "Yeah, what is it about you, Nora?" she repeated. While the gloved hands pulled the squirrel skin off the little body again, and then again, Kenny flailed himself. Truly stupid, deeply, irredeemably stupid. An accursed man of an accursed species on a doomed planet. He reached over and lifted Nora's head awkwardly by the forehead. "I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. I would help you, but I don't have a dog in this fight," he said. "I think you do," said Nora. Kenny turned and rolled home. That night, like every night, he lowered himself onto his cot, pulled his woolen blankets to his chin. Kenny could hear the blows of the humpback whales rising through the floorboards of his cabin, grunts and sighs like lovers behind pasteboard walls in cheap motels. He thought about the sex life of weightless, sighing mammals, what that would be like, floating, rolling, holding a great barnacle-warted beast in his fleshy fins. I really missed Kenny. As soon as he was gone, I thought, oh, I really miss Kenny. But we gave him a really good funeral, his friends and I. I mean, we did. We actually roasted him to ashes on a bonfire on the beach. And then one of his friends wrote him a really nice eulogy, and I will offer it here. "You're free, Kenny, so go. Float into snaggle-top spruce trees and settle on the shoulders of disappointed ravens. Rise on the upslope winds to the snowfields. Dust the blue ice and bog orchids. Spread your ashy wing across the water. Drift with the torn kelp. Sift slowly down in the dim salt water, past bulging yellow eyes watching. Suck into the gullet of a great ugly sculpin and stick to the tube feet of the blood-red star. Rise again with the roaring whales. And when the salmon come, go home with them. Go home to the place where they die. That is the place where life begins again." great wake, too, his friends and I. Poor Tick, poor Tick. He couldn't handle all that free booze that comes with a funeral. So he's down on the docks in the mist, and he's drunk as a skunk, and he's listening to the music up on the boardwalk, and he's blaming himself. How can you stand it, Kenny, to lose this? How can you stand it, losing night tides and wet docks? What's it like when it all disappears, just sucked gone? As the music played on, hand over hand on the light pole, Tick raised himself to standing. He rebounded from bow to bow along the dock until he got to the edge of the falling tide, under the dripping cross timbers of the town, to the hidden places only vaguely revealed, the rotten bases of the pilings, the gaping holes in the mud where soft things retreated, the slow slug of waves, the tick-tick of barnacles. Fog opened in front of him as he stumbled along, and fog closed behind him the way music will do, or water. Not night, not day, not alive, not dead. The fog absorbed everything, digested into something vague and formless and yellow. The air and the soft mud, the stinking shame that emanated from every step Tick took, the deflated kelp, the vague yellow shame of the world. So here's a second scene, the second of two. Foiled in his bear pit plan, spoiler alert, Axel has come up with a plan to dam a salmon stream and then bring in tankers to export the water to a bottling plant in Japan and then return it to Southern California to be sold in convenience stores. Why does that not surprise me? It doesn't reveal too much to tell you that Nora will stop him on that too. But she insists that she wants to give him one last chance to do the right thing. So she meets him at his office. Axel sat on the edge of his desk so he could look down on Nora, who was perched on a folding chair backed against the wall of the Good River Products office. It was sort of sweet, really, the meeting she had called, Axel thought. Her first mistake was agreeing to meet him at his office. That shifted the balance of power right there, him sitting on his desk, her clinging to a chair like a robin about ready to fly out the window. Her second mistake was that she didn't have a bargaining position. She didn't hold a single card. Under those circumstances, Axel was moved to tell her the truth, and he did. He wanted her to understand that he was not a bad or stupid man. "I'm sorry about blocking the salmon," he said. "I really am. I like to watch salmon spawning as much as the biggest eco-freak. If I thought I would be hurting salmon populations, I'd shut down. But my operation isn't going to hurt the population. It's not like there aren't other rivers and other spawning beds up and down the channel. No way we're going to run out of rivers. That's like saying Antarctica is going to run out of igloo ice." Nora stared at him open-mouthed. Axel smiled. He hadn't really meant to throw her off balance like that. She seemed to be thinking hard. "That's good to know," she said. "So, okay. The point is that there has to be some way to take what the land gives us and give back what it needs to be even healthier. The way the salmon do, that way. Our job, you and me, working together, is to imagine how to do that." "Salmon give back by dying," Axel said. "Are you volunteering?" "Oh, that was nasty." Axel tried again. "No, just joking. Tell me what you have in mind." He really was trying, but he did not get that Nora Montgomery. "Okay, so here's an idea." Nora pulled at her ponytail, and Axel had the impression that she was really trying too in her muddled way. "You go ahead and put a small dam on the river. You pull water out summer and winter. But when the silver salmon come in to spawn in the fall, you leave the water in the river, open the dam, and let them swim upstream. In the spring, you open the dam again and let the fingerlings run to the sea." Axel let the room refill with silence before he answered. "That puts me at half capacity," he said. "Which is more than you need to make a living," she said. "I don't want to make a living." Axel gazed at her over the rim of his cup. "I plan to make a killing." He leaned back and chuckled, but when he saw her face, he froze. "You've already made one killing," she said quietly. "Now that's uncalled for. unless you count the bear cub, and that makes 2. Now that's enough. Axel stood up. Of course, if you count the salmon, that is the end of this discussion. That is the beginning, she said. She stood up, which forced Axel to look up to her. Is that a threat? Because if it is not, said Nora. It's a warning. Axel threw up his hands in mock dismay, but she continued. It took God a whole week to make this world, Nora said. He likes it. And lots of times he said it was good, and it was good, and it was good. If I came to work every day and plotted how to wreck God's good world, I'd be keeping my eyes out for lightning strikes, earthquakes, other acts of God. She walked out the door, not even bothering to close it behind her. Fire and brimstone. She threw that one back over her shoulder, and something in her voice made Axel follow her out and watch her stride down the pier. As soon as he closed the door, he slammed his coffee cup on the desk. Coffee sloshed on his blotter. The beginning, he repeated. The beginning of what? He crossed to the window. Calm seas, flat calm all the way across the channel, a few squalls out toward the Narrows, but nothing that would reach him there. God on his side. But as he stared at the water, a black knife blade rose out of the channel, sliced a long gash through the surface, and sank. The wound slowly closed. Then another black knife blade, closer than the first, cut a long incision through water that winced and ran. Water shrank away as another knife rose slowly up and began to slice the surface. Gulls screamed. They swarmed to feed in the open wounds. And then there were 5 black blades, each as tall as a man, cutting the channel into strips. The killer whales veered suddenly in Axel's direction, and he fell back from the window. So this is a whole lot of fun. But honestly, it isn't really, because it's the same sort of struggle that is happening all over the world, and it's a struggle that has to be resolved soon. This battle between those who would make a living on the land and those who would make a killing. Only that's not the way they say it in Good River Harbor. I had to put these into their own words, but what I am talking about now, and what I've tried to explore all through this whole book, is the kind of thing that happens at this hinge point in history, where we either make a turn toward a different way of regarding the land, or we don't and pay the consequences. But this is how Axel says it when he tries to talk about his view of the world. This is philosophical phenomenology. This is environmental phenomenology, as one of my colleagues said, which I confess to at some points. But I'm trying to get these ideas embodied in the people and in the place. So, Axel, what is your worldview? For how good you Good River Harbor people are with your hands, you are surprisingly dim when it comes to business. You could have it all, that's what you don't understand. You can mine the mountains and the seas and the rivers, and the earth will just keep growing more trees, growing more fish. And do any of you think the rain will stop falling? That's the miracle of water. It falls from the sky. It melts from the glaciers. It's yours for the taking, world without end, amen. That's exactly what Good River Products is doing, taking it, transforming the unused resources of the earth into wealth for everybody. The more money there is, the more money there is to share around. Give Good River Products a couple more years and this channel will be swimming in money. And this was just the beginning, selling the water. If these people were smarter, they could figure out how to sell the goddamn air. So that's how Axel says it, but Axel's wife, Rebecca, has quite a different view of the world, and I will close with telling you what she says. With the free edge of the bandana, Rebecca swiped at tears as she climbed across the meadow. So here is the greatest mystery. What kind of person would dam salmon from a river? What kind of person would cut the salmon off when they are moving most urgently? Stop them just short of home after they've traveled 1,000 miles to get there? Who could do that? Who could deny them? Hundreds of fish struggling upstream? How could that ever be right? In what morally corrosive world? Dam a river, and salmon will throw their bodies against the dam until their faces are white with torn flesh. Then they will fin slowly in the cold tailwater, stinking and dying like drunks outside the door at the Greyhound station. When Tick turned off the chainsaw, the silence in the mountain was a holiness she almost remembered. Water flowing onto rock and the stillness of the mountain. The words she wanted to say to Axel tumbled through her mind. "We'll come back here when it's over, Axel. You'll sit beside me and never once think about how you could market the meadow. You'll think about how beautiful it is, and how strong I am, and how blessed you are to be in this place. We'll tell the story of the flood that God sent into the valley to save your soul. We'll make love then. It will be awkward, our rubber raincoats squeaking and sticking together. We will laugh and tug at the endless layers. Is there no end to this tugging and pulling, you will moan? Is there any way to get off a boot but to hop and yank? But then our clothes will be in a pile on the blueberry bushes, and we'll stand naked in our woolen socks. You will stroke my hair away from my cheeks and hold my face in your hands, using your thumbs to wipe the rain from my eyelashes. And you will say, maybe you mumble this into my hair. You will say, we can find a better way, Rebecca. There has to be a better way. That's what this book is about.